So at any rate, we're talking about the future of storytelling right now. And this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. My startup is a screenwriting and project management tool for VR and AR because I think that being able to better tell stories in this medium that's potentially the most powerful storytelling technology we've ever had is a really important thing. So I want to kind of set the scene. How many of you guys are familiar, have tried VR? Silicon Valley, represent. And how about augmented reality or mixed reality? Okay, so a good number of you. So I want to kind of, there's a lot of different information and I want to kind of set the scene for how we talk about it tonight. So I'll start over on the left side. So on the left side we have base reality. That's what we're in right now. You've heard a lot of things about simulation theory and things like that. Regardless of whether or not you believe in that, we're calling this one base reality. Moving inward, we get to augmented reality. And augmented reality is digital information overlaid and blended into the real world. So the obvious example being Pokemon Go, and that's through smartphones, and it can be done through tablets, but we also actually have, there's some big news actually from Magic Leap today about their SDK being available finally. So we're moving to a point where we'll actually be seeing headset-based AR in the very near future. And we already are seeing a lot of that as well. I don't mean to belittle the efforts currently happening. Moving inward, this is the stickiest sort of area, and this is mixed reality, and a lot of people use it in different ways. And in particular, Microsoft tried to plant their flag in the ground and called their whole effort mixed reality. Those of us in the industry didn't exactly jive with that when we were using it for different things, but we just kind of have to know that there's a little bit of a bifurcation. So mixed reality, as I'll use it, is when real elements are in virtual environments. So at VR Scout, we have a show called Art Attack, and that's where VR artists go into Tilt Brush and recreate masterpieces in VR. So that, and then you get 2D videos as a result of that we call mixed reality videos. And a lot of people in the industry sort of fall into that camp with the nomenclature there. And finally, getting all the way to the right, we get virtual reality, which is complete virtual simulated worlds. Obviously, you guys are all familiar with that, so I won't go further. And over to the right, what we're heading toward maybe is brain-computer interface, depending on how quickly Elon Musk does or does not succeed. So let's set the scene a little bit now that we have a basic understanding and we're on the same page of the market. So VR has been growing really rapidly over the past 4 years. And obviously there's a lot of chatter here and there about it slowing and XYZ. And the truth is, as we're looking, we've seen almost $8 billion of investment in the VR AR industry since 2013, with $3 billion projected this year. So that puts us at almost $11 billion total investment in just 5 years. One notable piece of that is that we've seen a 5x growth in enterprise investments over the past 3 years, which is sort of setting the scene from this B2B side, training, education. It's starting to matter in the enterprise realm. And the most fascinating and the most relevant to what we're dealing with tonight is we've seen a 79% increase in investments in the entertainment vertical in the past quarter. So now we're starting to see a transition from that enterprise focus and that really hard ROI focus into seeing the value of the storytelling components of this medium. So when we're talking about the future of storytelling, we should have a sense of what we're talking about when we talk about stories from the past. So any traditional storytelling mode applies here. So that's anything from stories around the campfire, to theater, to film TV, to video games, to books. But the point is, all of these different storytelling media are passive. Now obviously you might say, well, theater is not passive. I don't mean that theater doesn't have humans on stage acting in front of you. I mean that you can't go change what's happening in front of you. So the closest we've gotten to what's coming with VR and AR are video games and immersive theater. But both of those aren't quite at the full culmination of what immersive media is, because video games, again, are behind a 2D screen, and immersive theater is in one location only in that one place and time. But VR and AR can be anywhere at any time to any number of people. So when we start to look at the disruption, we're really talking about embodiment. We hear a lot of people talk about presence. When you're in VR and when you're in AR, you're actually logging these things as memories in your head. It's a very different thing than watching a movie and having a memory of that movie. The example being, if you go into a VR experience and you climbed a mountain and you take the headset off and you're like, I was just climbing a mountain, versus, oh, I just watched a movie where these guys were climbing a mountain. That's the core differential between immersive storytelling, where we're headed, and traditional storytelling as we understand it. And the beautiful thing is we're just getting started. There are so many new things coming down the pipeline and things that are happening because it's starting to really crystallize in people's heads. So you have things like the Void's Secrets of the Empire now at Disneyland. So you can actually go into a hyper-reality experience with your friends with this tie-in to the Star Wars franchise. We've got things like the Walking Dead Encounter, which is an AR game akin to Pokemon Go, where zombies are sort of coming at you from all directions. You have to fend them off. And we might think like, oh, that's kind of like low-hanging fruit use of that technology, but we start to think about the ways that people can share that technology with their friends. They can go on social media, they can play with it together. That's not something we've really ever had before. We also have virtual computing coming. We have virtual analytics, data visualization, things that once you're in 3D and in space, register totally different in the mind. So what's exciting to me is that all of this stuff is about to be at mass scale, both at a level of consumption and at a level of creation. And it's that shift culturally that really is where storytelling is going to start to fly. I really love this quote as a way of kind of setting the scene for why this stuff can be so powerful. So Buckminster Fuller, famous guy, has this quote: if you want to teach people a new way of thinking, don't bother trying to teach them. Instead, give them a tool, the use of which will lead to new ways of thinking. And I have to thank my friend Rachel Sibley for this depiction because I think it's really, really potent. We're used to seeing the solar system look like this. Now, imagine if we could start to show things like the solar system, which we've had to abstract into 2D, like this. So now just imagine that instead of watching your favorite movie, you're in that movie with your favorite people. This is the kind of stuff that the future of storytelling holds for you. So with that, I want to introduce our rock star panel. I'm super excited to be introducing these people. So moving, I guess, in from the right, we have Maddie Callander, Director of Operations at Boost VC, also just one of the sweetest people you're bound to meet in your lifetime. We have Ted Schilowitz, a futurist in residence at Paramount. We have Larry Cutler, the founder and CTO of Baobab Studios. And we have Sho Moser, who is the, depending on what part of the world, COO or CEO and co-founder of eyecandylab, and they have an amazing tool called Augment TV. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Robin for your featured startup talk.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. I'm Robin, and as Jesse just introduced, I'm CEO of eyecandylab, and we are an AR company based out of Germany, and we recently started our US operation. This is why there's a slight confusion with the roles, but we're happy to be in the US because this is a great market, and I will tell you in a minute why. So right now we're at an inflection point. For the last 100 years, our relationships with content and specifically with video remain unchanged. So we have seen many advances in production technologies to create more visually immersive pictures, but how we interact with video has remained unchanged ever since. It's one-way, it's a one-way medium. So regardless of the technology or format, video content has always been a read-only format. So this is also what Jesse referred to, and where audience is simply an observer. So he's just observing whatever the TV, the radio is telling him. So the proliferation of internet-connected smartphones and tablets have enabled us to, at best, create a fragmented interactive video experience. So just a quick poll, as Jesse also just did. So who of you uses his phone or tablet while watching TV, if you watch TV at all? So Yeah, that I think is pretty close to what Nielsen says. So in the US alone, it is 81% of the viewers who are using a second screen device while watching TV. So the second screen has been called ever since 2010, its first appearance in 2010. It is, and we basically have to focus either on watching the content that we want to see, so the TV show, or we have to concentrate on the second screen experience where we have interactive chats or where we're talking with friends about it or getting additional information, or we want to Google who is this actor. So it's kind of fragmenting the experience, and that regardless of the fact whether that is intended by the producer. So for example, if you have an accompanying second screen app, or if it's unintentional because there's just social media and everyone is talking about you or the show. So I hope a few of you had the chance to see our demo that we just did, and we're gonna do that later on if you're interested in to show you how our product works. Basically, we created an augmented reality technology for TV. It would work with any kind of video and with any kind of smartphone or tablet. So brands can create interactive TV experiences, and broadcasters can monetize through e-commerce around their content by putting additional content around the TV, and sports enthusiasts can retrieve any kind of statistics on the match while they're watching it in real time without having to look away from the TV. So this allows immersive TV with a value add of second screen experiences without losing basically the eyeballs from the TV itself. So it could also do replays as it was just shown there. So augmented reality technology is positioned to transform our relationship with our surrounding forever. And the power of mobile and wearable devices that we have nowadays to augment any video with interactive objects create an entirely new relationship with video. So with augmented reality, audience can touch the video, so an interactive two-way relationship with video is possible. You could create a home shopping channel where you can interactively try on the things you see. You could create interactive games where the viewer, while watching, can answer the same question, so you don't have to discuss with the person next to you whether he's right or you're right. You just can do this live on TV. Additional information to visualize, to provide knowledge deepening fact. Who hasn't searched something on the internet while he was seeing a program because he wanted to know even more about that? You can now visualize it in augmented reality. Or kids program where actually the character, your favorite character from a childhood, is coming out of the TV and sitting next to you on the couch and is enjoying with you the TV program. And last but not least, the sports use case, which we showed also previously, where you can retrieve any kind of statistics. And since in Europe, the betting thing is also already legal, that is a humongous market for our technology because you can visualize all this data in real time. We kicked off in Germany already 4 months ago, and we know that the viewers are ready for this new type of experiences. So we launched with Galileo, which is a national TV show on Pro 7, which is the second largest network in Europe. And we achieved, for a 1-week program, we had on the first day 870,000 viewers on the TV show, and at the same time 170,000 users in our application. That equals a participation rate of 20%, which means that every 5th person watching the linear TV there was using our augmented reality technology to get additional information around the program, to have an interactive experience. So this shows us that the people are ready to get rid of the one-way TV, but they want to get an interactive experience here. So we have, over the 1-week event, we had 350,000 users in the app that generated 650,000 sessions. So that means nothing else but every user who used our technology returned later that week for another time to enjoy augmented reality. And we know from the Nielsen ratings that actually an average user would just watch the show 1.2 times per week. So we could drive people back in front of the TV because they knew they can get additional information and experiences. So changing consumer behavior requires some assistance from technology and distribution partners to reduce the friction and developing core technologies and getting it into the hands of the people. So with Apple's AR Kit and Google's AR Core, Microsoft's ecosystem around HoloLens and 3D on their Windows 10 platform, as well as Facebook Studios, all major tech companies are aligning their software and bringing augmented reality products on the market. So even Google just recently announced that they're going to open Google Maps for any kind of developer so they can create the next Pokemon Go. Augmented reality brings many opportunities to TV and the filming industries. It allows creators to develop new formats that deliver tailored experience to the viewers. So the constant development of hardware brings the price level down on the long run, and at the same time, it makes it affordable for the mass market. And Bose, for example, they just released their AR headsets for audio, so it's not just limited to the visual component, but you now can overlay any kind of audio while you're out there. So the last one that you see here on the bottom right is Magic Leap, and I think it's impossible to not have heard of Magic Leap. So they have raised $2.3 billion in funding, and so if you wonder where the big chunk went on Jesse's slides, this is actually where it went. So, and they haven't even shipped a single unit yet. So this shows how huge this market is. So the market for AR will be outperforming the expected market for VR by far within the next couple of years. So this is compared to the previous slide, not the investment into the AR VR market, it's the potential market revenue there. And DigiCapital is projecting an $8 billion market for AR in the year 2021. And a market that is estimated at $5 billion alone for the next 2 years is the AR advertising market. So we provide a technology for new formats of advertisement around the TV and video, and we are delivering a platform so content creators can monetize their content, and in this way we're becoming the enabler for even better storytelling of the future. Thank you.
Great. So now we're going to move to the part of things where you get to hear all their genius insights. So we got to hear a little bit about how eyecandylab how their work is intersecting with this future of storytelling. But let's go through and if the rest of you wouldn't mind giving a quick sense of who you are, what your work is, and how it intersects with the future of storytelling.
So I'm Larry Cutler. I'm the CTO and one of the co-founders at Baobab Studios. And at Baobab, we are really reinventing traditional animated storytelling using VR. And what we've found is that while VR isn't a new medium, it really is a new platform and a really powerful platform for telling stories in a way that's quite distinct from film and from games. And I think you really hit the nail on the head of what's so powerful about it is this ability to actually make you part of the story, to immerse you in the world where you actually have a role to play. You can actually make a difference and matter in the stories that we're telling. And this has really been pretty amazing to us. And so our background is really deeply rooted in feature film production and storytelling there. In fact, I actually began my career as a grad student here at Stanford doing VR research 20 years ago. So I saw the promise of VR a long time ago, but I also, I guess as a 24-year-old, realized that it wasn't quite ready for being productized. And so I went to work at Pixar in the early days and saw kind of the disruptive power of computer animation disrupting sort of 2D hand-drawn animation at the time, working on some of the earliest films. And then I was at DreamWorks where I met my co-founder, Eric Darnell, who was the writer and director for the Madagascar films. And so, we really came to Baobab wanting to take our experiences in understanding how to tell stories of great characters and, really, sort of traditional storytelling, but being able to tackle this immersive medium where, you have agency and you're part of the experience. And so we've released 3 pieces of content to date. So Invasion was our first piece of content. It's actually, if you haven't seen it, it's actually being shown in the back there. But it's basically a story of 2 aliens who try to take over Earth but are thwarted not by humans but by a cute little bunny, Chloe. And really what was surprising to us, Invasion ended up being really popular, which was surprising to us on one thing. It was our first experiment. But what was really powerful was just the way people interacted with the bunny. Basically the bunny hops up to you at the beginning and you're a bunny in the scene, and people just reacted as if the bunny was real. People were waving at the bunny, trying to reach out and pet Chloe. A lot of people were mimicking what Chloe was doing, which is this really powerful nonverbal communication cue. And it just highlighted that there's really something here in terms of not just being able to have an emotional connection with a character, but feeling like you're part of that world, that you're actually interacting with a bunny as opposed to some computer-generated image. And so we've since released a follow-up to Invasion, Asteroids, which is kind of focuses on the 2 alien characters' relationship last year, and that really dives more deeply into the role of the viewer and you being part of the narrative. And right now we're finishing up work on a piece called Legend of Crow, which is based off of a Native American folktale. And so, again, talking about how storytelling can transcend medium, this Native American folktale had been told in the oral tradition by a number of Native American tribes over the several centuries. And so we're really excited to actually be bringing this into VR, into this new medium. And so we're going to finish up that piece in a few months. So we're excited for that to reach you in the near future.
You, Ted?
Hi, I'm Ted. I work for a big movie studio, Paramount Pictures. I used to work for 20th Century Fox for the last 5 years, 4.5 years. And before that, I helped build various products that a lot of you might use if you're in the entertainment business in one way, shape, or form. I worked very closely with Apple for a long time building this thing that we call desktop video now. And then built some hard drives that became a thing and a movie camera that became a thing. And then some friends at 20th Century Fox said, we want someone to help us look at the future of our business. So would you do that? And I said, well, what kind of job is that? What exactly do you want me to do? And they said, well, you'll just have to figure it out. I said, well, who do you want me to do it with? They said, well, you'll have to figure that out too. So it was basically like not a real job, and it still continues to not be a real job. But when people ask a lot, because it's an unusual title, they call me Futurist at the movie studio. So everybody's like intrigued by that. And Larry's like, you have the coolest job in the world.
I want that job.
Yeah, and everybody wants the job. So, but really what I do for a living is I'm a lab rat. I live inside things that are emerging and developing, and I look for where the creative and storytelling potential is in the technology and the way people are using the technology. So people often think, oh, well, you're a technology guy, right? And I actually say, well, actually, I'm more of a humanist than a technologist. I actually look at how people react to the technology that they spend time with and probably don't realize how much time they spend in their technology bubble. It's pretty much over the last kind of 2-3 years now, so moving into our 2020 timeframe, it's basically from the minute you wake up till the minute you go to sleep now. You are looking, touching, involved with some sort of technology that is primarily screen-based now at some point in time. So I live in this interesting sort of odd world where I get to experiment with things and play with things. And what I like to say to people is, I like being in a world where all the things that I see are more wrong than right, but they're on the way to maybe getting right. So everything that you see floating around that corner with all this stuff that we're building, I believe that's all mostly wrong. It is not what will actually drive this market forward at mass scale. It is not what will change the human quotient. It is just the kind of breadcrumbs along the way that are like 95% incorrect. But we're marching our way toward finding the magic of what will be correct. So I give this kind of reference point where I call what we have now with most of the devices we use that are quote unquote futuristic is I call them BOF devices. It stands for box on face. And I don't think anybody at a mass scale other than enthusiasts are really going to say, I want to wear a box on my face all day. It's just not really what you're going to do. This device, Magic Leap, is more on the right curve than everything before it. And I spent quite a bit of time with them, and I've been watching their evolution and testing and living inside that world for now probably close to 5 years. And they are getting within striking distance, and I think it will be an interesting step toward the future, but I don't think it is the end-all, be-all. I think it's still a marker along the way, but I am actually really enthused for a lot of you to get your first look at this thing that very few of us have had a chance to see and see what its capabilities are, so I'm excited about that. And when it comes to storytelling, that's the essence of what we're all using this stuff for is, okay, tell me a story, right? You came from Pixar, and I think Pixar was probably one of the most interesting, dynamic, loving, caring organizations about understanding the appropriateness of technology in service of the story, not the other way around. And very often when you see new technology starting to emerge or things that people perceive as new, like none of this VR stuff is new. It's been around for 40, 50, 60 years now in some way, shape, or form. It's just finally starting to see its first commercial touches. You start to look at a dynamic that the story repeats itself over and over and over again, where when you get technology that starts to live in people's mindsets, spectacle overtakes story. And people are really interested in the spectacle of the tech. Wow, it's cool, the visuals are cool, 3D space is cool, that's cool, right? But over time, people realize that the spectacle isn't all that important. It goes away quickly. And if you can't relate and connect to someone and move their emotions and take them on a journey using the technology, you basically got nothing. So what I like to do in our movie studio and what I see other movie studios doing and small independent studios doing, the best ones, are linking this idea of you better tell me a really, really good story. You better move me, you better take me on an emotional journey, and if you're planning on making me cry, you better make me cry. And if you plan on making me scared, you better make me scared. And if you plan on getting my adrenaline going, you better get my adrenaline going, which is no different than any other storytelling medium. Yeah. It's just now we have the ability to throw ourselves in what I call spatial storytelling, which is actually different than immersive storytelling, which I'll stop now because I let other people talk. But we can talk a little more about the delineation between spatial and immersion and why all this VR stuff, AR stuff is so important when it becomes spatial. So
great.
We'll stop there for now.
Yeah. Maddie?
Oh, God. Okay. I'm up. My name is Maddie Callander. I am Director of Operations at Boost VC. We are an early stage venture capital firm and an accelerator that invests in VR, AR. So I have been at Boost for 3 years, and we started investing in VR startups about 3 years ago and have had the opportunity to work with about 70 companies in the space at the earliest stage of their growth and development. The teams on the outside is the type of people that I've gotten a chance to work with. And it's been incredible to see the journey of VR before headsets were released, and we were investing in companies, headsets, like the types of companies and the themes that individuals and technologists have been trying to create, realizing what they wanted to create and then bringing it to life. So we're kind of a part of that side of it where they have an idea, VR now exists and AR now exists, so now there's an opportunity to actually bring that idea to life. And how do they go about doing that? I look at storytelling as a little bit differently, more as what is the human relationship that exists and how are those relationships going to need VR to thrive. So in a business environment, I have a team across the world. How am I going to communicate with my team? In a social interaction, how are we going to build relationships virtually online in social settings? So I'm looking more at the human interaction with each other in a social way. How is it aiding and adding value to me? And what is the potential opportunity from a business side there as well, and to make that grow. So we're looking at a much earlier stage, a little bit less around the storytelling side, but it's definitely still about human connection and fostering that human connection.
Well, and that speaks to one of immersive media's abilities to make anything a story in some sense. You know, if I've made a platform where there's different sort of things in front of me, that's a story that's occurring in the mind. One thing I want to pick up on is, I want to pick up on this idea. You said there's breadcrumbs of things that are working. So I'll start with you since you initiated it, but I want to hear from all of you. What are some of the things, what's the 5% of things that you're seeing working right now?
So I think over now a couple of generations, we're seeing the evolution of this thing that we broadly call video games, and how large an industry it has become, and how it stimulates a part of a brain, mostly a youth brain, but older people now because generations have moved into it. So I play a lot of video games as well as watch a lot of traditional narrative storytelling. That is really interesting when it comes to applying this to virtual reality and augmented reality, because you can now live inside your video game. You don't have to just watch it on a screen in front of you. It can feel like it's actually happening to you. And then the really wonderful creative artists and scientists that start to experiment with all this say, what would I do if I could basically make the world into a theme park? And you don't have to go to a theme park to live and interact with things. You can just put a theme park onto your face. And that's an interesting sort of analogy to what a lot of the entertainment sort of looks like. Is it's more of a ride, like all the location-based VR things that you brought up, which are early sort of telling signs to what the home experiences will be. They're essentially using consumer-based technology to take you on a spatial journey where you feel like you're moving around in the story and not just watching the story. And we're doing it out of the home spaces. It's kind of like this sort of gap bridging between a traditional theme park that costs a tremendous amount of money to build this ride environment where it takes you on a ride. So you can only do it in a few places in the world correctly. And now we've kind of put this power accelerator to that, and we say, okay, now I can take people on rides, and they can do it almost anywhere. And now the ride doesn't have to just be 8 to 10 minutes long. It can be 2 hours long, or 15 hours long, or 40 hours long, which is kind of where the video game industry has evolved into, is these massively complex, multi-threaded story, action-adventure experiences, and now have taken another turn in terms of just becoming worlds that kids just drop themselves into and make up their own story as they're playing these games. So if I can get them off a screen and give them a better screen that makes them feel even more immersed in it, that's a pretty interesting future. So that's kind of why I look at it.
You might have some insight onto that.
So just to get back to the 5%, which I see is going the right direction, I would like to see that from another perspective. So not from what do we provide, what do we come up with, what do we develop for everyone to use. I see the 5% from another side, from the user's perspective. So I think coming up with all these different use cases and all these different technologies, eventually the people are more open and find their use case where they see, okay, augmented reality is helping me in that part, so I would use that, and I'm opening up to that. So because I think, especially in the early days of virtual reality, so early days, my perception is probably like a few years ago, so not a few years, decades ago. So the early days for virtual reality, where you had this, okay, I can go on a ride, on a boat ride to Tahiti, and I put it on, and then I say, okay, so what is the use case here for me? So what is the value add here? I think by having all these different amazing use cases that are coming up in gaming, but also in education and entertainment, in medical, everyone starts to see how augmented reality and virtual reality is enriching his life and is adding value to his own, to his own life. So I think this helps us to drive the adoption of this technology further. Yeah. So that's the 5% that I found here.
Well, I love your 5% analogy, and I guess I'll ground ours in just pure the storytelling and the creative side as opposed to going macro. And I would say, first of all, that we have learned firsthand that 95% of the things that we do don't work. And so, in thinking about creating stories for VR, we actually, I think we approached it and felt like we could just take our knowledge of how we create a film. You know, Eric was feature film director, directed 4 feature films, you know. He was like, I could just come in here and, you know, sort of tell any story, and it would work in VR and take the same tools that I used. And we were all really humbled because everything that we had learned and that we tried to do didn't work. And we found it out really painfully because we'd bring in users and we would show people, and people would be looking at the wrong place. And so some of the things that were insights of things that started to work for us, and I think these are just really baby steps, but you know, maybe this is useful to you, I don't know. You know, one of the first tests that we did with Invasion is we had a little bunny Chloe, you know, she was in a medium shot and you're in the scene with her and it looked great in a 2D screen. And when we got in VR, there was just this incredible distance between you and the bunny. And then over time, we kept moving the bunny closer and closer. And then one day we were like, it'd be really cool if you were actually a bunny in the scene with her. And so we were like, well, what if, and we never thought about that. I mean, you know, Eric wrote this as if he was writing a 2D short that he was going to put up on the screen. And that insight of like, it's amazing that you're in this world, but you have a role to play, and I need to think about what your role is. That was a key insight for us, and it wasn't obvious in 2015 when we started this, just to be clear. Like, most of the VR experiences, really, I think we really were the first from a narrative standpoint that really thought of you as having a distinct role and in a physical character. And the reactions once we went down that path were just very different. The other interesting insight we had was that, and we debated this for a long time, is at one point in the narrative, we place Chloe behind you, and she's scared of these aliens that are attacking, and you're like the only thing in between, you know, like the aliens and Chloe, and all of a sudden you were in the middle. So at the time there were no hand controllers, so we couldn't really make you act in the scene, but you were in the middle of the scene. You were there between Chloe and the aliens, and people felt really uncomfortable, you know, like they didn't know where to look, and we were taking full advantage of that. And at the same time, there was something really like powerful about you protecting the aliens. And most people, after they'd get off the headset, would be like, wow, that was like the most compelling part of things. And so that highlighted to us that the idea of, you know, which you touched on, of you being able to be part of this experience, of you mattering in a way that's different than watching something up on screen where you have no relationship to the world of the characters. And it's pretty amazing, if you think about it, that you can actually watch a 2D film in the back of a theater and get such an amazing emotional response. But those two things just highlighted to us, you know, where VR could go. And,
well, you know, what's interesting when you talk about that, because what we've discovered on our journey, and probably you all have as well, and that have done a lot of VR, is the medium, when you start talking about virtual reality, has a built-in intimacy that the storytellers, as we were starting to build and learn these things, weren't quite aware of how instantly intimate it is. And how, because it's virtual reality, so this human space continuum of, like, different cultures have different senses of comforts of space. Like in certain cultures, this would be fine, and you'd be like, why are you so close to me? And in virtual reality, it's the same thing. And you actually learn that objects and characters don't play the same way that they play on a remote screen. Because up for 100+ years, our viewing experience has been separated from our being, right? And we've sort of seen the gap start to change when we start to hold a magic window, right? So we use this phone thing that we call a phone, which is essentially not a phone at all. And it's a visual device that we start getting more and more intimate with. And that was kind of the leading kind of tale of telling us, now, what if I take that really sort of beginnings of intimacy and make it really intimate? Like you're in this private viewing world. And suddenly characterization, so a guy like Eric and other creators have to actually absorb that and figure that out, because it was different than anything they'd ever had to do before. So intimacy is different when you've got a screen that's 80 or 100 feet away, or even 6 inches away from you, versus literally it's on you and in you. So you kind of, everything changes. The way you tell a story changes.
No, and I think that's the biggest thing is that the way that you have to go about directing the viewer's eye and having that relationship with characters is just very different. And it's really exciting, you know. So if you think about the evolution of film, it took 20 plus years to develop that language that made it a distinct medium versus, let's say, videotaping a play, which is really where it started out. Right. And here we're going to go through a similar evolution where obviously we have a lot of tools in our toolbox that come from film and come from games, and we can utilize them, but in a very different way. You know, so the first thing Eric wants to do is move the camera, and moving the camera is literally moving your head, and so that makes you nauseous, and you know, and you want to cut, and you want to do all these things that don't work the same way, and of course, we still use those techniques. It's just you have to use them differently and be very careful.
Yeah.
Well, we've had to your point, when you've had a box sitting in front of you versus a box on your head, once you've tried the box on your head, you're like, why would I go back to a box in front of me? Like that type of thing. But I think, you know, the frame that we've been given has held our face in a very stagnant place where you just have to look here. Like you don't have a window into the world. You don't see it. It's behind the screen. It's at a distance. It's removed. It's not emotional. I'm not attached. I don't feel it. I'm not there. Like it's at a distance away from me. I can see it and I can understand it and I can be moved in the back of the theater, but I'm not feeling it entirely emotionally. I'm not sitting on the ground in a space there. And I think VR is really, so the 5% of things that I think are moving the needle right now is the emotion, is the empathy, is being able to like jump into a world and explore it and have no one control where my head is looking. And of course you can throw things at me and try to choreograph like where you want me to look and what you want me to do and where you want me to go next and put flashing buttons in front of me to walk down this path this way and look that way and have something explode so I look this way, but you have no control over my head anymore. I have full range of motion. I can look wherever I want and you can attempt to distract me as much as you want, but I can do whatever I want. And so there is a really interesting autonomy and there's a really interesting sense of individualism when you're in VR versus when you're in a movie and that director has full control over your head and where you're looking. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I can't see what's happening to the side of the conversation. It's more of a choreography, like, and it's almost to your point of filming on stage. You lose in theater, like the audience can see, you know, you have the perspective of the different seats in the theater. And now we're in theater in the round and everything can be seen. From the camera and often in a 360 video to like the moving parts behind, you have to think about everything that's going to be seen in that space. Because yes, you're just plopping me in the middle and now I'm in your world. And what do you want that to look like? So I think that is a really interesting part of the 5% that we've never had boxes on our head before. So like now we do, and it's like, whoa, what can we do with this? This is pretty freaking cool.
Totally. And one thing I've seen with that is that a lot of creators really leave out space and tone when they're building stories, because in film often that's the lesser important of the, you know, plot versus space and atmosphere. But that proportion shifts in immersive. So I'm curious, you know, both from augmented reality and virtual reality and any other, you know, sort of new toys you're playing with, what techniques or what techniques have worked for sort of addressing people's ability to guide attention, if not forcibly direct it, and also to invite participants into an experience in a way that kind of honors their agency?
So for augmented reality, I think we have it helps us that right now our content is mostly attached to TV. So whenever we do augmented reality TV, still everyone is focusing on TV. So of course, despite the fact that you can also have some scenes happening behind you, right of you, left of you, it's still kind of aggregated around the TV. So therefore, that helps us to, from a storytelling perspective, to keep the viewer's attention there. However, we have experienced that we had this amazing thing in our German launch, and we were so proud of it. It was kind of an animation, and it would fly around in your living room, literally, so you could follow it. And then eventually we found out that no one saw it, because it was just, no one knew it was there, so we were kind of disappointed, because we, of course, did some basic tracking, and we knew what kind of interactions were appealing for the people, where they interacted most. And it was like, we got the results, and it was like, is there something wrong with the tracking, or why didn't anyone interact with that? And I think this is one of the the part that VR has more advantage in, because there are more use cases out there, so you know from the experience what you have to observe with doing this kind of storytelling with augmented reality. So the next time what we did is we implemented kind of an indication where something is happening, so to let the people know that they should look up or whatever. So I think that these are the challenges that we had to face when we did the project in Germany. However, I think doing all the kind of getting experience and also seeing what is happening in the field of VR. So when I refer to needing force multipliers who are basically setting a standard and telling everyone, okay, so in the AR, VR field, whenever you want to do some interactive, do this kind of logo or that kind of indication so the viewer would know. I think that behavior has to be trained over the next few years or decades, and then eventually people would know that also instantly, but for now it's a lot of pointing, there is something happening, so.
There's two aspects to this. So there's one aspect of how much do you want to allow people to be explorers and explore in the world versus directing their attention and having the story go. And that's actually a really challenging problem in and of itself. And then there's the other of when you actually have the story going, how do you actually get people to look at the right place at the right time so they don't miss what's going on? So I want to start with the second one, just because that's actually very interesting, and I'll get back to the first one as well. But with the second one, that with film, you really have an incredible wealth of 100 years of experience of how you actually focus someone's attention in a rectangle, and we can do it really, really well. And through the use of camera, through the use of composition, through the use of field of view and depth of field and of lighting and everything else. Whereas in VR you really can be looking anywhere. And for us it was really important to not kind of stop the story. So one of the techniques you could use is say, hey, if I look away, then I'm going to actually have everything go in cycles and kind of wait for me to actually pay attention. And we really didn't want to do that just because that wrecks the pacing and creates this sort of alternate world, right? So I'm sure you could do that really well, and I have seen examples of that done well, but we didn't go down that route. But one of the things that we started to pay attention to was how magicians use misdirection. So magicians do a great job of, if you want the audience to look at you, you look at the audience. They use eye contact, and then once you have the audience looking at you, if you want the audience to look up at your object, you look up there, and you might be doing something else with your hand behind your back. And so we started to really play around with that. And so in Invasion, just by using really simple eye contact of having a character look at you, and track your eyes like the bunny, then everyone looks at the bunny. Nobody looks away. And so it's really interesting. At that moment at the beginning of Invasion, almost no viewers are looking off in the stars or looking at the other part of the scene. But then we can actually direct the viewer's eye. And the hardest part of Invasion was you're playing around with Chloe and then a spaceship comes, and you would think it'd be really easy to get you to focus on the spaceship, but that actually was really, really hard. And we thought we could just do it with sound, to be honest. Like in a film, we have spatialized sound, we can have this huge buildup, and so we tried a bunch of different things where you would have this, sort of gradual build of sound. And what would happen is people would hear sound and look up, but they wouldn't see the spaceship because it hadn't arrived. And then they would, immediately start looking around, and so a lot of the things that people do are just very different than you would expect. So what we ended up doing is you have the bunny, you're looking at the bunny, and then the bunny looks up at the sky. This seems really simple. And then everyone looks up at the sky as well. And then we can actually use sort of traditional techniques of having a black object on a white background, of composition, of the spatialized sound. So all of a sudden you could then start to use sort of traditional techniques. With Rainbow Crow, the project we're working on right now, one of the things that we were doing for cinematic reasons is to have really theatrical lighting, because we wanted this storybook look. So the idea is totally unmotivated, much more like a theater where, as characters come into frame, the lights come up on them, and then the lights come up on different parts of the scene, totally unmotivated. And we were doing this completely for a look standpoint. But what we realized is that this is actually a really powerful, age-old technique in theater that works incredibly well to direct your eye as well. And so you start to build up this arsenal of things that really help with this problem. It's not a problem, but really help us make sure that you're actually able to digest this story and be watching the parts that are relevant. Now, at times we actually want to give you the opportunity to be looking at multiple places and to have that that dichotomy of possibilities. The other part of it is we really have a tough time balancing how much exploration to allow, and we actually create some pretty amazing, cool worlds. In Asteroids, you start out and you're in this alien spaceship, and who doesn't want to play around in an alien spaceship? And so our original idea for the story is that you would all the little consoles on the alien spaceship would have interactive elements, sort of environmental interactivity, and we designed some crazy stuff. And when we started user testing it, basically nobody paid attention to the story. All they wanted to do was play with the spaceship. And so we sadly had to take all of that out and even remove some of the design. And so there was this weird balance where we ended up creating an alternate version where you can go and just play around in the spaceship, on our in our app. But it really does highlight, I think, that's something I would say you're probably 95% wrong on of how you actually get both. How you actually have moments where you can really settle in and explore and not feel the rush of the story, and then have moments where the story is really moving forward.
If you give me teleportation, I'm going to teleport everywhere.
We actually, so the first user test we did, on top of people playing around with the consoles, then we had a teleportation mechanic that was used in a lot of VR experiences. And what we found is everyone just sat there teleporting around.
Yeah.
And nobody, I wish I'd videotaped it, because it was really one of the most...
I take screenshots from the random places I teleport to,
Yeah. So
and send them to the company and be like, did you want me to go here?
Yeah, so we
Because I did.
But you're learning something.
Yeah, so for us, for a certain experience, that would be great.
Yeah.
For our experience, that was horrible. It was we all sat in a room afterwards and cried. And that was literally 2 months before we were going to go to Sundance and release our product. So we were, it was the first time we had the story together. We get our users, and nobody paid attention.
Yeah, but what you discovered is one of the core tenets of these big quotes new mediums is they allow for physicality.
Yeah.
So again, it goes back to this deep core understanding of what is an interactive medium, right? So the minute that you give somebody their hands, or you give somebody the ability to walk around in an environment, they're going to expect to walk around and do stuff with their hands.
And what was interesting is we wanted, for Asteroids, we really want that. So it wasn't that we wanted to restrict your movement. We wanted you to be able to move around this amazingly cool and large spaceship, and we wanted the spaceship to feel larger than life. So we specifically made it so that no Vive room would be the size of the spaceship, just because it felt like it was the right size. And we debated that. It did highlight that we needed to change the way that we actually moved, that you were able to move in the space. So we ended up going with what we call a blink mechanic, where you basically incrementally move. And that, for some reason, through more user testing, felt to people like a more natural way of I can kind of incrementally move, but I'm not so overloaded that I need to find a specific location in space.
Yeah, for those of us that kind of are in the practice of this now, that are actually living inside this stuff and doing it all the time, you start to get a really strong sense of the things that are successful in the medium today, and the sort of micro hits that we have in the medium. And they have one thing in common, is they have extraordinarily good physics. They're not necessarily amazing visually. They're not necessarily amazing from a storytelling standpoint yet. That is kind of the emerging art form. But what the best purveyors of the art are discovering, and the sort of commercial provability, even in the earliest stages of this, is these are the ones that are actually the most commercially successful. because there is a little commercial market to this. People are actually buying these things in a small number. The ones that have grasped the idea of the physicality of the universe that you're in and allow you to do things that actually feel like you're really doing it are the ones that are winning both creatively and economically right now. So that's, again, a little bit of a telltale sign. If you want to be in this business for the next little bit, don't forget this medium is primarily a physical medium. It's actually not a visual medium. It uses visual and physicality together, and one doesn't live without the other. So it's really difficult for stories like you that are actually leaning toward kind of the tropes and ideas of traditional, what we call traditional narrative or traditional storytelling, traditional animation. It's easier for someone that doesn't actually have those hooks from the past, that is just coming from, I want to build a world where I can throw fireballs.
Yeah.
I want to build a world where I can take giant tanks and move them around and lift them up and they are weightless. I want, it's that kind of stuff. And then the story sort of finds it from that as opposed to the other way around is what we're seeing the most success in the medium from. Now, where it gets really, really interesting and bizarrely crazy and experimental is when you start to blend all that goodness of what we're learning and you start removing it from the virtual world into the mixed reality world, where now you're starting to play with objects and things that can actually live in your physical space. And there are much less good examples of that, but they're starting to come. And if you're curious, I can give you examples of things that I think are starting to give us the right breadcrumbs and tell us these are the ways that you'll be able to tell stories. You're going to live inside a story in your living room, and suddenly your living room is a crime scene. Your living room is an action-adventure experience. Your living room is a haunted house, which is quite terrifying when you start to experiment with it. But this is kind of where all the storytelling is going. So, like, one of the interesting things I make reference to a lot is a lot of you know this in a way that you don't really realize, because I presume a lot of you played something called the Nintendo Wii. Do you remember the Wii? So the Nintendo Wii was the first home virtual reality experience at scale, because you were no longer playing a game with a controller. You virtualized your physical body. It was still using a traditional screen like this, right? It was a TV or something. But you weren't playing a video game. You could let grandma bowl in the living room, or you could play tennis in the living room. And if you look at kind of the evolution of where VR and part of AR is today, that's the logical evolution of this. And the key sort of core thing that we all learned, this is virtual reality, is because Nintendo had to actually put safety straps on those little things, because people would get so into it that they would forget and they would throw the thing and they would break their TV because it was right in front of them. So that's you think that's kind of kitschy and stupid, but it was actually a very good little moment for us to learn about how important physicality is. So when you remove the screen and you create the physicality, believe it or not, probably overtakes everything else, and you have to create story in support of the physicality, which is a whole new paradigm.
Well, and I would add that it's interactivity is becoming part of the storytelling language now because of spatial and immersive formats. Yeah. We could get lost in this tunnel, totally. And I'd love to. And if you guys have questions, ask them later. But I want to get into the little bit of the nuts and bolts stuff in terms of the money. So Maddie, I want to start with you and ask a little bit about startup. What startups are finding success? What types of startups are finding success? Particularly geared around the ones that in some way incorporate story, not necessarily content plays, but training simulators can have stories. So if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think what we've been seeing the most recently in the media and in the news has been around training, and how do you train employees? How do you train them for interactions? Again, it kind of ties back to the human interactions. So if we can replicate different scenarios and be able to run you through these different simulations, we're able to learn much faster. Being in VR is somewhat like dreaming, like lucid dreaming to a certain extent, so you're able to kind of remember it in a different way than you would a two-dimensional pamphlet or a two-dimensional video training system. So we're seeing a lot of money heading in that direction. There have been some very big plays in the content space for actual really unique storytelling as well. And I think we're seeing a trend in social right now tremendously to bringing people together in virtual spaces from all over the world. and how do we communicate with each other as a new medium, kind of thinking about what is the future of telecommunications. So we've been in phone and Skype, we've moved to online internet portals. What is the future of a two-dimensional meeting that we have? So where do meetings head, and what type of meetings can we have? And what do we do in meetings if we're across the world, and now we have this virtual world that we just said is now physical, our heads, our brains, our eyes, our whole bodies are there. What are we doing there? Are we working and designing on something together? Are we sculpting? Are we editing and mocking up a new manufacturing item that we want to run through or send for a proof, but we want to get everyone in the room together to have a conversation around it? What types of social interactions are necessary for businesses on a regular basis, where maybe there's a huge travel budget that goes into having to send someone back and forth? Or, so I think we're seeing a lot of really interesting social engagement spaces. The physics is a huge part of it, being social in VR with someone else and being able to hand you an object and take it from me. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Well, and we often forget that those things are stories. In fact, like I leave a meeting with a story of what happened. And now if I can draw in the air and we can play with it, that is storytelling. People usually write it out of the picture. But moving a little bit to the opposite side, Robin, I'd love to hear from you about what avenues of monetization are you seeing find success both with eyecandylab but also, your contemporaries?
So I think the monetization, we're right now at the point where we partner up with broadcasters and studios. So because they're sitting on this big pile of IP and they don't know how to remonetize that because it's been aired once and probably a million times. So we're talking about the studio about adding augmented reality features so they can just box that up and sell it again, but this time with enhanced content, so that would give you access to additional content that you could interact with your favorite character of the show. So all this kind of interactive add-ons. For the broadcasters, on the other hand, they're struggling with a declining viewership, so they have to come up with new revenue streams themselves. So in the demo I showed, it's about monetization for the broadcasters with e-commerce. So if you would air, let's say, Big Bang Theory for the 125th time, then he could basically get revenue, for example, by selling products that are shown on there. And that sweater that the character is wearing is going to be the same in that episode, but also if you air that same thing in China or in Japan, it will be all the same content. So basically they can generate revenues, so especially the production companies, around producing this content beyond just having the contract for the production part. So this is how we think we can add value to broadcasters and studios from a monetization standpoint. For ourselves, we provide them our license, and this is how we basically finance ourselves. So
cool.
Yeah, and of course sponsoring and all this kind of stuff. So if you have, if you saw the sports demo, if you have specific AR experiences that are delivered by one sponsor, and you say, okay, the next that replay or that experience is delivered to you by that sponsor, then this is a new revenue stream, and probably it's going to be the same in the US as it is in Germany. So there's this pretty restrictive rule on how much advertisement you can put on air while airing a show. Basically, by putting that around the TV, it's not conflicting there.
Good cheat.
Left, yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny. We see a lot of advertisements going into VR directly in 2 dimensions. So people will hang up like posters in VR of ads, and you're like, wait, didn't we just move to VR and we're still doing 2-dimensional ads? Mm-hmm. So I think there's a huge opportunity for immersive advertisement to become something more tangible, like the object placement paid for in a space, or this picture being something I could easily like pick up and look at and purchase from an engagement versus still 2-dimensional blimps flying around my in immersive game or different things like that. So.
Yep. So one last question from me before I start kind of gathering these audience questions, and this is directed for Larry and Ted. Obviously, Hollywood is probably the most visible sort of storytelling force in the world. Mm-hmm. And to a certain extent, Hollywood's being pretty heavily disrupted. And you guys are seeing this from two different vantage points. So I'd love to briefly hear how you're seeing Hollywood receive emerging technologies as storytelling forms.
Sure. So traditionally, Hollywood tends to be a lean backwards psychology, not a lean forward psychology, whereas places like Silicon Valley, where we are now, or Israel, or other parts of the tech world tend to be very lean forward, right? They find new things by developing new things. So in my kind of odd little universe, my goal, job, so to speak, is to function and act like a startup inside a 100-year-old legacy business. Ultimately, my goal is to achieve a certain sort of vortex of success so that eventually the new young eats the old and it doesn't go to somebody else, because I'm working for this entity. So my goal is to make this entity as relevant as a pure true startup, which is actually much more difficult than you might imagine. But the goal set is to try and create the culture of a startup inside the studio. So while everybody else is busy making money, doing what they need to do to run today's business, I make an ask that we get to ask anything we want from the mothership. We can pull any kind of resources we need. We can do essentially anything we want in the essence of learning what might be valuable in the future, but they don't get to ask anything from us. It's a one-way street, because we literally act like a separate entity, even though we're not a separate entity. And that's the only way you learn. So if you're curious about this, there's a really good book that you could read called The Innovator's Dilemma, which teaches you at its essence why startups succeed when legacy companies can't. And legacy companies can act like startups if they set a little independent division that literally has no ownership, onus, or value system from the mothership. And they can get advantages from the mothership because they can be capitalized from the mothership. They don't have to go out and get venture capitaling. But you have to actually really practice it. You can't sort of just pretend.
Yeah.
The other book, and I was mentioning to some guys sitting over here on a slightly different tone, but if you're interested in probably reading the most formative and the most important book within the sphere of what you all do, read a book called Future Crimes by an author named Mark Goodman. And it will give you a very sobering, interesting look at what we are doing to ourselves that is sort of popping out in these little media bubbles all day long about big tech companies like Facebook having all kinds of trouble these days. This guy was quite predictive of all what was going to happen, and it's really an interesting book to read. So those are things I would sort of recommend from my standpoint.
And Larry, any other comments about Hollywood's reception?
I think obviously Hollywood is very interested in things. They're always looking at what's on the horizon, what can disrupt them. In fact, Comcast, which owns Hollywood
NBC
entities
and many other things.
is one of our Series A investors. So there's
So is Fox.
and so is Fox. Yeah. So Ted is actually or was an investor in us.
Yep.
So there is definitely interest from Hollywood in where this is going. But at the same time, it is very difficult for studios that have a tried and true business model to actually commit resources to be going and running into a wall. And I think your point is very well taken, that the only way within a large organization that you can actually have the ability to go and try things that are really disruptive is to be independent where you don't have to answer, because inevitably a big company, as you're running headfirst into the wall, which is pretty much what all startups do, they're going to want to pull you back. Like your large organization is really, really good at making sure that you don't have epic failures.
Yeah.
And with a startup, you run into the wall headfirst a zillion times and you hope that you break through one day. For us, one of the interesting things is that Hollywood right now primarily will say, okay, my interest in VR or AR is to actually take our existing IP and then basically do some VR add-on, after the fact. And it's really an extension of marketing right now, for the most part, and I'm generalizing. And in fact, going back to the revenue question, if we actually wanted, as a small company, to make money right now, the best way for us to do it would be to we've gotten lots of offers to take other people's IP and to actually, make VR content for other people's IP, and that, we could make money off of that. But for us, it's really about us learning and experimenting and being able to create our own characters and our own stories that could be uniquely told in VR and in an immersive way.
Well, and what you're working towards is a hit strategy.
Yeah.
So this kind of like hyper obvious thing that everybody seems to miss about all this stuff is this medium is no different than any other creative entertainment medium when it comes to the fact that almost everything that gets created, almost all the sweat and the time and the energy that puts in to all these mediums, whether it's writing a book, creating music, creating a movie, a television show, a game, now a VR and AR thing, almost all of them will fail. 99-point-something% will fail. They will never see the light of day. They'll never have any commercial benefit. But every once in a while, there's a nugget that will make so much of an economic win that it pulls the force of the train to try again. And everybody keeps trying. And that's the entertainment business. And that's what the entertainment business has been for the last 100 years. And I don't see any change in that. I see that there's a lot of people trying to figure out what is going to be the hit. And at some point, we're going to get a hit. We have micro hits now, which within our little world, our little sphere, everybody does. Jesse and I do this for a living. We would probably say, yeah, we do. We have our 10, and we did them all. We've watched them all, just like we've watched the best TV shows and the best movies. But what we haven't had yet is the thing that everybody in this medium will absolutely talk about and say, you have to go see this. Whether you've been in a VR headset or an AR headset in your life or not, you better go see this. A correlation to that is what happened with the Pokemon Go phenomenon, right? It just exploded for a moment, and then it quelled down and went back to its core audience. But that has yet to happen in these mediums, but it absolutely will happen. And it will drive the economics for the next 10 years, and then the next 10 years, and the next 10 years, and the next 10 years.
Yeah, and I would say that, in all honesty, when we look 5 years from now at what we are doing now, I sure hope that we're like, I can't believe that we were this stupid and that we were actually doing the things that we're doing and telling the stories in this way. Because with each piece, we have to be experimenting and learning. And then the hope, and this obviously ties into the innovator's dilemma, is that if you actually hit that nugget of amazingness, then at that point, you really have not just the talented team, but you have the kind of expertise and the blood, sweat, and tears of how you got there. And that's very hard to replicate. And
you also have to be open to the unobvious, right?
Yeah.
Like, we all make this presumption of this linear path. So storytelling will do this because it's going to do this.
Yeah.
And we can see it. We can see the way. But the example I like to give is if you went back 10 years when the iPhone was just starting to emerge out of the primordial ooze, and you said, what do you think is going to be like the biggest disruptive sort of economic force? And someone said, oh, it's probably be like it'll disrupt taxi cabs. And you'd be like, what? What are you talking about? It's like a little TV screen. Huh? And then you've got, a $60 billion valuation for a company that came out of that essence. But that's the inobvious. So kind of what I like to try and look at, and it sounds like what you're looking at too, is what are those things that are kind of off in these weird dark corners that you're like, why would anybody ever watch this? I don't understand. But that's the one that catches. It's not the obvious things that catch.
Well, speaking of which, I want to jump to moderator questions. And by the way, let's do this popcorn style. There's a ton here. So let's just have not each person, but whoever grabs one, then that's the end of that one. We'll move to the next one. Because there's, like I said, a ton of great things. So sort of building off of that, but moving a little bit to the left, one person asked, when will user-generated content be as big for AR, VR as it is for video?
Starting to happen.
I mean, I would say if you look at Snapchat and what people are able to do with lenses and in an average of 6 seconds, it's pretty amazing and pretty engaging. And so I fully expect that those types of user-generated stories to really skyrocket.
Yeah.
I mean, Instagram's blowing up right now on the story side of thing, which is storytelling about my everyday life, and I think that type of setting where you're able to quickly grab and add and apply different filters and show off where you are is going to be something that will continue to only grow and probably overtake the original role of Instagram's like fixed grid.
Do you believe VR is capable of helping society beyond entertainment?
100%.
100%.
Yeah. Medical, social, humanitarian, empathy, 100%.
Yeah, my daughter has a weak eye, and so she has to wear a patch. And I happened to meet someone who had the same thing and built VR games to actually train your eye to be stronger, and does this on adults, which normally patching won't help on adults, and it blew my daughter away. And like seeing that, but there's 1,000 of these different types of things for medical, for training, for I think it's going to have huge impact.
Yeah, and huge economic impact.
Yeah,
it's already happening. Yeah.
Totally. How can tech startup founders use these new tools to help tell their story and really stand out from other companies competing for funding and customers?
There you go.
I mean, if they're not in VR and they want to pitch their investor in VR, it might get a little confusing, but it's actually very doable now. We've taken startup pitches in VR where you can upload a pitch deck and you can come in and we can have a conversation, and it's much more personal, it's much more like social than us being on a phone call or on a video call and kind of being on our sides of the screen. We can go a little bit deeper, we can have more conversations. So I think there's opportunities that are going to be there for this social meeting interaction where you could actually pitch. But beyond that, the actual pitch deck itself, we've been in PowerPoint for a very long time. Like the fact that PowerPoint is still a used thing is kind of mind-blowing. So what does a PowerPoint for VR look like? What types of 360 stills can you lay out to be able to showcase the world that you want to create or the object that you're building, or maybe you want to be able to show off the different sides of a hardware device that you're creating, but you want them to be able to look at the entire thing or manipulate it in AR in front of them, or scale it so that you can jump into the middle of the object and see what that inner piece of it looks like. So I think we will definitely be using AR in some form of investor pitching or storytelling for startups.
Cool. Speaking of which, how long will box on face be the prevailing technology, and what technology follows it?
So I'll give you a year, 2024. And the reason why I say that is because I have this belief structure that everything that is really formative travels on a 10-year curve. So I use the iPhone as an example. We're 10 years into the iPhone. Anybody know how long YouTube's been around? About 11 years. That's it. The first YouTube video was the kid at the zoo, 10 and a half years ago. Now, where YouTube is. So I think that the current state of this melange that we're in now started around 2014. So somewhere close to 2024 is when you'll have 4 to 5 full turns of the tech. You get it about every 18 months to 2 years, which lives, of course, on the curve of Moore's law. So you're going to see that all the stuff we use today will look very, very primitive. It'll look kind of like the black and white televisions or the computer monitors like this. It just won't, you won't use any of it. It will be like, oh yeah, I remember those days. And that's somewhere, so it's going to take a lot longer than people think. It's not a year from now, it's not 2 years from now. You're going to see little incremental changes, but the real I remember the day when we used to do all this is somewhere around 2024. Just like some of you, because you look like me and you have gray hair, remember the day that a phone was actually a phone, right? And that was somewhere along that 10-year curve. So that's where 2024 is put it on your calendar, 2024.
Save the date. Robin, I'm assuming this one's for you. It's not specified, but what is the tipping point for AR?
I think it's going to be the adoption in the mass market. So we see a big success with cool startup that make AR headset for the mass market. And I think bringing a headset down to a price point of $150 maybe, where you can just snap in your phone, there are great companies out there. I think that's going to be one of the forces that help us to bring AR to the mass market.
Cool.
Can I add one thing to that one?
Of course.
I think the thing in AR that I can't wait to have is an augmented pet that is able to come with me wherever I go, where I could have a dragon flying around that none of you can see and that I'm able to train and then follow me along. There's a lot of infrastructure.
We can do that right now.
I know.
There's lots
We got those.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of like interesting things where then where we can then be social about it and we can reveal them or hide them or be able to bring them with us. But there's a social element of like having something or someone come along with you on that journey every day through your life that I think will be interesting to see.
I mean, talk about a story too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think and I'm biased because I'm a content creator, but I think the thing you're talking about is obviously there's one aspect which is the price point and the turn of the cranks as you talk about it, but the thing that really drives the mass market is the content and the applications. Absolutely. That actually, where it's like, oh my God, I have to have that dragon that's like hovering behind me, and
I have to go buy the glasses to have the dragon hovering behind me.
Yeah. So I think that ultimately is going to lead to the inflection point, whether it's in VR, AR, each of those markets.
Okay, so kind of inverting that question, if machines can simulate and render emotions as well as human kinematics, why will actors exist?
Well, I guess I would just like to say that this question has come up throughout my career, actually. So this isn't a new question, but I guess for me personally, I'll just say, personally, I've spent my career not trying to recreate the reality of human actors, but really trying to create worlds that are fantastical and where we're actually trying to create something that doesn't exist. And to me, that's just a much more interesting way in looking at the technology and what's possible. I have no doubt that computers will become smarter, and you already see examples where visual effects are able to almost get to the point where they can recreate other characters, but at the end of the day, there still is something amazing about a performance of a really amazing actor. I just don't see that going away anytime soon.
But to the other point, your user-generated content thread, like, do we all not just become actors in these different like portrayals of what we're doing? And
I think that's everyone has a different sense of what's a story, and so in the user-generated content space, there's obviously the stories that people are creating, that is that is only going to grow and multiply in interesting ways.
Yeah. I mean, this may be a little side turn on that question, but there's sort of multiple answers to that from a movie studio Hollywood perspective, right? The first thing is that from the dawn of this kind of entertainment, you've always had what we call animation and live action. Yeah. And there's always been, and probably at least in our lifetime, will always be a use case for both. Now, with technology, you start to see the blending of that, right? Doesn't mean that one is less important or one goes away, but if you watch a movie like The Last Planet of the Apes, which is all this performance capture, and you look at the level of fidelity of these animals, and your brain is like, that's not a CG character. Like, I'm looking at that thing, I know it's a movie, I know that Weta created that, that looks like a real animal. Like, you cannot discern it. If you want to see an amazing piece of work, which I'm curious, because you and Eric have seen this, it was the animated short that I really thought should have won the Academy Award this year for animated short. It's a little animated short called Garden Party.
Yeah, it was really funny.
French students did it.
Yep.
The animation level is so unbelievably
amazing.
photorealistic.
Yeah.
It's frogs and all, and your brain is like watching this going, is this live action or is it animation? You just don't know, right? You literally don't know. It's crazy and it's beautiful. The other sort of pieces of the puzzle that are very relevant from a movie studio standpoint is we can, and we've been doing this for some time now, create digital actors that you can't discern, is that a real person or not? We de-age actors. We've done it with Michael Douglas. We did it with Kurt Russell and Guardians. Not our studio, but another studio did it. And so we can make an actor look younger now. It's very expensive. It's very exotic. But it's not going to be that way in the future. There are some very, very smart actors and actresses now that are starting to scan themselves every 5 years, very high fidelity scans, because they and their future estates are having a realization that their likeness if they're a YouTube celebrity today and maybe the biggest star on the planet tomorrow, it might be really valuable to have them at age 17 scanned so that they can keep reiterating that and creating that. So that's a thing that's happening right now. That's
Not
a real
Black
thing.
Mirror episode, real life.
And then the other thing that's really interesting is we are now creating motion pictures fundamentally and predominantly in virtual reality. We're actually using virtual reality as a pre-visualization tool. So for some of you that will go see this movie, hopefully a lot of you will go see a movie called Ready Player One, which is all about VR that Steven Spielberg did. Almost all of that movie is actually created shot by shot in virtual reality, so that when they actually went and shot all the live action, they knew exactly what they wanted to shoot. The Jungle Book did it somewhat. There's 4 or 5 movies that have done parts of it, and there's one gigantic movie now that I can't tell you the name of it, but soon enough you'll know, that is literally shooting every single shot of the movie in virtual reality, and then are going to recreate all that when they go onto the set and actually shoot triple the efficiency than they could shoot a normal movie, because they know exactly what they're going to do when they get to the set and start spending that money. Literally, it's just all the creative stuff they can do in a virtual world. So it's still like they're on the set. They're just in a virtual set. And they create all that creativity. They iterate. They spend all the time. They figure it all out. And then they go out in the real set. They just push 5 buttons and it all gets shot. And of course, they still can change up their mind if they want to. But surprisingly enough, they don't, because they've already done it like 300 times already in VR. So these are like real things that are coming from that question.
Thank you so much. Round of applause for our
No, time to
rock
stop.
star panelists.
Stop.
Thank you, guys.